Hey everybody, Brian Fonseca here to tell you about the multi-time award-winning series out now that is Side Hustle, which is created, executive produced, hosted, and edited by me, Brian Fonseca. Side Hustle is a sit-down interview series that taps into sacrifice, the odd avenues taken to progress closer to your ultimate dreams, and some jokes as well. Because we always gotta find it funny, and we always gotta find time to laugh. Side Hustle has been named to the best TV and web series category at several different film festivals, including the 2020 International New York Film Festival, the New York Movie Awards, and a host of others. Be sure to watch season 1 in full right now on either brianfonseca.net or youtube.com/brianfonseca. Brian with a Y, remember. All 8 episodes, trailers, teasers, and promo are free to watch, and the series as a whole is approximately 2 hours long. Everyone has a story, everyone has a side hustle. Be sure to watch season 1, out now.
Hard to Tell podcast, episode 164. Dexter Henry, Brian Fonseca here. We have a guest. I've been trying to get this guy on the podcast for quite some time. We go way back. We go back to covering high school basketball in the NYC a long time ago. My guy, Marc Raimondi, with ESPN, now does a lot of coverage with combat sports. Marc, what's up, man? Long time no see.
What's up, fellas? And it has been a long time, right? It's been a long time since we chatted. I know we text once in a while here and there, but I think we go at least back a decade, right, Dexter? Like
at least. We're
2010,
talking even before. It might even be before that, man. It might be like 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
Because I would like to tell the people so they can know, because we like when we get new journalists on. Marc, you started with, I know you from working with Five Borough Sports with our guys Dylan Butler, our guy Zach Brazier, going way back to doing that. That's how you kind of got your start into sports journalism, right?
Yeah, my first job was at the Times Ledger newspapers in Queens, where I worked with Dylan Butler, and then the 4 of those guys, me, Dylan, Zach, and Joe Stashevsky.
Joe, sorry, Joe, forgot you, man.
and that was 2009. 2008. We started
2008.
Five Borough Sports. So I was at the weekly paper before that, then Five Borough Sports, then the New York Post, starting in 2009.
Yeah, that's it. And so that's how far back we go. And now you've been covering a lot, which is Brian. Brian, you guys just met, but Brian loves violence, so he loves combat sports.
We met once before at, I don't remember which UFC card it was, but Daniel Cormier was in the main event. Actually, I remember Daniel Cormier versus Derek Lewis.
I remember because
because Marc was gonna come on the pod around that time, and then you got sick.
Yep.
I remember that you got sick. Either that week or whatever, which, I mean, I think you were actually sick at the event, which you would never obviously do nowadays, because given the times that we're in.
But actually, with all the travel, like every few weeks getting on a plane and then jumping from city to city, like I used to get sick pretty often.
And Dexter talked about the same thing, because he's like, this is kind of messing with my immune system a little bit, where because you're going in all these different areas or whatever. The weather's like always changing. Like, I can't imagine that, because I've had jobs where I've had to travel, but not that much. Like, Dexter knows.
Yeah, for Marc and I, who worked pre-COVID, we're traveling a lot. Yeah, you're always getting sick, and you're always dealing with the elements and being different places. It's definitely tough. Marc, now you're doing the ESPN thing, and you're writing, you're covering combat sports. What has that experience been like for you?
It's been great. It's been really great. It's been really cool to kind of be at the starting point of the ESPN UFC relationship with the UFC on ESPN beginning in 2019. So they started in 2019 in January, and I got the job in April. So I've almost been there really from the very beginning of the ESPN era in the UFC, and I really do feel like the UFC has grown since January 2019 in the last 2 years. Being on ESPN, getting that kind of promotion, and it's just been a really cool experience to tell those stories and have that kind of access to the athletes, the highest the highest level athletes in the world as far as combat sports go. So it's really been great. It's been the highlight of my career thus far.
It's dope, man. You're doing great work. I love it. And I texted you the other day because I really like this feature you did on Jake Paul. There's been a lot of talk about it. Brian and I have talked about him on this podcast after his last fight with Nate Robinson, and you had the article "Boxer or Spectacle: Inside the Attraction of YouTuber turned fighter Jake Paul." And I think when you look at this piece, Mark, it's a really good look, and I'm kind of recommending this for anybody who hasn't read it yet. About should we take Jake Paul seriously? Right? Should the boxing community, media, everybody who watches the sport, should they take Jake Paul seriously? After working on this piece, what do you say to that? Is Jake Paul someone to be taken seriously?
Well, I guess it all depends on your perspective, right? I think that in terms of, well, to me, this is a story more about boxing and the business model and the format and the structure of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much built on pay per view, on broadcast rights, on money. I mean, it's a money sport, and the best fighters in boxing, the best boxers in the world, are not always necessarily the ones who get paid the most amount of money. The ones who sell the most pay per views are the ones who get the most amount of money. So the idea for this story kind of came with my editor Andrew Feldman and I discussing Jake, this whole Jake Paul phenomenon. It pretty much swings the balance a little bit between good boxing and who can make the most money. Because for the most part, even the guys who make a lot of money on pay per view now, they're still very very good at boxing. They're still championship caliber, even if they aren't the best. But Jake Paul is not championship caliber. That's obvious. We know that, right? Yet he is one of the most popular boxers in the world somehow at 2-0. And he's probably standing to make the kind of money that even the top championship level boxers are right now. How much they're making now. So the whole idea was to kind of, contrast that to what's going on in boxing now. How did this happen? Why is this the case? And to me, it's really more of a story about not only boxing, but also today's culture. It's really more about popularity and what can drive clicks and views and what can go viral. That's really the world that we're living in now. And Jake Paul is capitalizing off that in a different medium than he started in. Obviously, he started as a social media influencer. He still is, but now he's pivoting to boxing, which some would argue kind of a brilliant decision because there are a lot of the same principles in boxing, in combat sports, because the same thing, what clicks works, what goes viral sells. It's all about the money and the views and the attention, and he's doing it. And I think so far he's been doing it very well. I mean, say what you want about him, I don't think he's a great boxer. I don't know if he'll ever be a great boxer,
right?
But if he starts the conversation, he finishes the conversation, and he sells. So that's, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a business.
And so it's funny hearing you say that, Mark. It's funny hearing you say that, Mark, because there are some parallels with, and Dexter, you see what I'm saying here with this and just the world of music in general, where a lot of people, we've talked about the differences in this podcast between underground rap, quote unquote mainstream rap, and now we're in a generation where guys are just like trying to put forward whatever antics they could in order to get popular, thinking that that's going to sell music. This is and Jake Paul, by the way, has made a few songs, so like there's sort of a good connection here. So whatever, I haven't heard any of them, but he's obviously gone that route as well. And then you talk about like just trying to stir something up. How many times have you heard this in MMA where guys are like ranting at the end of fights or women are ranting at the end of fights? So I'm not somebody who calls people out and they don't give me opportunities. You're smiling because it's true. You've heard it. Like they're like, oh, this person like they start talking trash and that's how they get opportunities. And I'm over here, I'm just winning fights. And it's happened to guys like, especially in the flyweight division or some of the lower classes, whether it's men or women, like a lot of guys, I think Figueroa was like this too. Like he was just going about his business for a while. And then he finally gets the opportunity, but it took him a long time because he didn't really say anything. He wasn't somebody like Conor McGregor who also like hyped up his fights and was a big, big star. And Jake Paul is doing this at a time where, and this is what I want to ask you, is this poor timing for boxing or great timing for boxing? Because the sport clearly needs something, but the sport has also been like, I was optimistic when PBC started, but clearly we've seen, and even with the zone, like things have really like not picked up in the way that they should.
I think it's probably a very good time for boxing if you're Jake Paul. There's certainly a market there for these kind of fights when there's that heavyweight triumvirate of those three guys, Joshua, Fury, and Wilder. And Fury and Wilder have fought obviously, but Joshua hasn't gotten in with those guys yet. So there's kind of that desire to have the best fight the best, and that's been kind of a long running issue in boxing is, can the best just freaking fight the best already, right? Give me the top guys, give me the champions.
Have you seen Canelo? Who's Canelo's fighting next?
Yeah, yes, I sure have. I sure have. He's supposedly going to fight 3 times in 2021. So if that's the case, then I don't mind, a little bit of a tune-up fight coming in next before he goes and fights, Saunders. But I do think for Jake Paul, I think it makes a ton of sense. And look, I actually want to, before I even continue with that train of thought, I want to go back to what you said, Brian, because what you said about rappers and hip hop and the new generation, like the SoundCloud rappers and that type of stuff, that's exactly what Timothy Bradley told me when I talked to him for the piece about Jake Paul. He said, I'm an old school guy. I like the old school rap, the old school hip hop. But Jake Paul is kind of like the SoundCloud rapper. He's popular with the kids. He's got a fan base. He's like, I don't really know what he's doing or what he's saying or if it's any good, if there's any quality to it. But he's getting the masses over. And Tim Bradley said that he appreciates it and he respects it. And he said he told his boss at ESPN, let's get a YouTuber in here. Let's get a YouTuber on the undercard for the next big ESPN card. So he's like, if you can't beat him, join him and get more interest. And I think that's what. It's such a hard. There's so many things going on in the world. There's so much stuff coming at us at all moments of the day on our phones, on our laptops, everything. And if you can get through that noise, and Jake Paul has to at least a major demographic of people, younger people, that's a huge deal. That's a huge deal. And if he wants to box and people are willing to pay to see it, I think that's okay. I do think there are some limits. I don't think that anything that people would pay to see is automatically good, and you can say, okay, write it off. I'm not that much of a capitalist, but in Jake Paul's case, it seems like he's taking it seriously. He's training very hard. If you listen to his coaches, he's really solid in sparring. You hear some of the sparring partners say, he's got some talent, and he's got the following. And if people want to pay to see it, sure. I don't know how long it lasts. I don't know if this is a long term phenomenon, but as of right now, the here and now, it's maybe it's a fad, but it's working, whatever he's doing.
Mark, depends on who he fights. That's all I wanted to say. It also depends on that, too.
Mark, in your piece, you had a quote from Clarissa Shields where she spoke to TMZ, and she said they're making a mockery of boxing. I just say that because there are so many fighters who deserve to be on that platform under Mike Tyson, and Roy Jones did not get that opportunity. Jake Paul's making his money. He's doing his thing, but stay away from us real fighters. So as you brought up, everybody's not on that same positive side of the fence, right? Where they're like, hey, this is a great opportunity, great promotion for boxing. She used a very strong term in saying that he's making a mockery of this. When you're talking to other people, is everybody as optimistic as Tim Bradley, or are there boxers and MMA guys and gals who are like, no, we're not down with this?
No, it's there are people who were very upset about the whole Jake Paul situation, and I understand. I completely see that side of it too, because if you're a boxer, you grew up either loving the sport, or maybe you're in a tough situation where you grew up and you need something to do to get out, so you become a boxer and you take those incremental steps, from amateur to maybe, USA boxing, then to the pro level. And, you're hustling and working your ass off for years, for a decade before you even see any kind of amount of money. And sometimes you never even get there. And Jake Paul has 2 fights and all of a sudden he's headlining pay-per-view. So I understand where boxers are coming from. I think that's a very legitimate gripe, but it's not necessarily Jake Paul's fault. It's more the system's fault. He's just exploiting the system that already exists. So the fault, if you want to take fault with anything, it is the system. Should it be that way? Should it be more of a sport? I wish it was. I wish in an ideal world, combat sports, MMA, boxing would be more of a straight up sport like anything else, because Jake Paul's not going to go play the 3 guard for the Lakers.
Right.
It doesn't matter how popular my man is. He's not going to go play, linebacker for the Rams. But in boxing, he can go box and headline a pay-per-view. It's very different. And I do wish it was a little bit more of a meritocracy in combat sports. But the fact of the matter is that it's just not. And he's exposing that very much.
Backpack Broadcasting continues to bring you the best original sports content, but now you can get more of the content you love. For as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus content, including behind-the-scenes footage and interviews from the Sports Walk, Sideline Stories, or the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. All this exclusive content comes via Patreon. There are tiered levels of patronage, and each Backpack Broadcasting patron receives exclusive perks. Your support helps Backpack Broadcasting create more of the original content that you love. Visit Backpack Broadcasting's Patreon page and become a patron today.
Would we get to a point where this guy, particularly Jake Paul, is headlining a fight and maybe some more talented fighters than him or better matchups than whomever Jake Paul may be fighting could be the undercard on that? Is that something you think we could see in the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that right now he's fighting for Triller, which is the social media app. They're promoting fights now under the Fight Club banner, which is also co-promoted and co-owned by Snoop Dogg. And I think that their model is going to be more of the celebrity, the athlete from other sports, the social media influencer, those type of people getting into the ring and boxing. Maybe that changes, down the road. I think it's going to be very much, trial and error. And it's really going to probably depend on what people want to see. Whoever can draw interest, it's such a weird, it's so different, right, from the other sports because it depends on what people are willing to buy. And if people are not willing to buy it, then it's no good. It doesn't matter how good you are or how bad you are. If you're not willing to buy it, if people are not willing to buy it, it's just not going to do well. So there's going to become like a breaking point. There's got to be a marker somewhere. Like Logan Paul was supposed to have an exhibition match with Floyd Mayweather. Seems like that's been postponed. I'm not sure why it's been postponed.
Thank God.
But is there enough interest for that?
Right.
Is there a market for that? And I think there's going to be a lot of people over the next year plus, kind of dipping their toe in the combat sports world to see if there's a market for these different kind of fights between influencers or celebrities. I mean, there was celebrity boxing like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of the next evolution of that with social media influencers. And it's just, it's interesting. And I think that I'm not sure if it's going to really penetrate combat sports so that, the UFC is going to start putting, YouTube stars in or anything like that. But it may have a market on its own. It might.
And the thing is, like, when it comes to this, like, ultimately people will want to pay, and Jake Paul knows this, otherwise he wouldn't be doing it. People will pay to see him lose. Like, that's something else that it comes down to. And this is why I'm actually legitimately intrigued for his next fight. He's fighting Ben Askren, who is an awesome wrestler, but is historically sort of just made fun of for his boxing, which we've seen, not so well in UFC, which leads me to believe, like, and Jake Paul has talked about wanting a certain level of respect for doing this, for actually taking on a fighter. I think he could actually win this because it's a boxing match, which I don't know what that would say, but he's obviously being very careful about who he's going to fight. So, like, what do you think could stem from that fight directly if he does win? And do you actually, like, see a scenario where he could win this fight? Because I think it's actually possible, given that Ben Askren is not really a boxer.
Yeah, I definitely think he could win this fight. Absolutely. There's a big age difference. Jake Paul is much younger. He's only 24 years old. He's pretty athletic. He's got some power in his hands. I will say about Ben Askren that even though he is a wrestler, this is a guy that's been an MMA fighter now for, more than a decade. And he has sparred with very good boxers, very good strikers. And, he's been through, I don't think Jake Paul is going to give him anything that he hasn't seen before in the gym or in the cage. So I'm actually really interested to see it. I'm very curious. I think it could really go either way because Askren is not known for his boxing. He's a tremendous wrestler, and his wrestling ability got him, 2 championships in 2 different organizations. He won UFC fights with his wrestling, and Jake Paul is a very unproven combat sports athlete. So it's really interesting. As far as like winning and losing, I think it's really important that Jake Paul wins this fight for his future because this is a fight that is obviously designed for someone who is 2-0 in boxing against someone who has no boxing fights whatsoever. So even though he's fighting a combat sports athlete, it's not someone who has really any experience in competitive boxing other than, just practice. So it's certainly his team sees this as a winnable fight. Otherwise, they wouldn't be giving it to him when he's 2-0 when they have grander plans down the road. They want to fight, a Conor McGregor or someone like that down the road. So this is a must win for Jake Paul if he's going to continue on and be a hot act for a while. It's going to be interesting to see how long he can keep this going for, because his whole promotion game, it may not be as effective if he's coming off a loss. And if he loses, does he even want to continue doing it? So I think it's all very much touch and go, and that kind of, it makes me. I'm not gonna lie. Maybe call me a Mark, but I'm kind of not M-A-R-C, M-A-R-K.
Yeah.
I kind of want to see that fight. I'm pretty curious about it, guys.
I am too.
See, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask because, like, all right, let's just assume he wins. Like, we regroup, we watch it, he wins. Let's just say it's just a decision, because I don't think he's gonna knock Ben Askren out.
But see, I was going to get to that, Brian. Does it matter how he wins, right? Do people need to see him? I don't think it'll be like Nate Robinson, obviously, and we know he's, and that also has a lot to do with who steps into the ring and how prepared they are. But does it matter? And I'll to you, and I'm throwing this to Mark as well too. But does it matter how he wins this next fight against Askren?
Absolutely, it does. It matters. If he wins by knockout, and that's another addition to his highlight reel, man, people are going to be really upset, because Jake Paul is going to be bigger than ever. He's going to be a bigger star than ever, and he's going to move on to an even bigger fight next. If he wins by decision, I think he'll still move on and be a bigger star, but it just won't have that kind of cachet. If he goes to an 8-round decision against Ben Askren, I don't think it'll have that kind of same drawing power, because I think people do want to see knockouts. It's entertainment, and I don't think people want to see a boring fight. I think people want to see Jake Paul or Ben Askren knock the other one out, and both of them have their fans and both of them have their detractors. So there'll be people on both sides wanting either one of those things. And a decision it may feel a little bit unsatisfying, but we'll see. I mean, that's the thing about boxing and MMA. You can't. It's not pro wrestling. You can't draw up the result. It has to, whatever happens, happens.
Right.
I think Jake Paul knows that, and I think he's gonna go for the knockout, because he's like, when you're a novice in boxing, that's kind of what you do. Like, you're not but so patient. So I think he's gonna go for the knockout, and Ben Askren might use that to his advantage and try to get him caught. But let's just say Jake Paul wins. Let's say it's by knockout decision, whatever. But let's just say he wins the fight. If you project just moving forward, like, he's not going to start getting in the ring with actual, even journeyman boxers who have a record of like 8-8. So are they just going to, with Triller, just pull celebrities, like other celebrities who want to do this? We saw Lamar Odom signed a contract recently, different organization, a more dangerous and weird organization, which I wrote about on Desmond, but that's another story. But we saw like people like Lamar Odom are getting involved in celebrity boxing now. So clearly there's a market for this, for better or for worse. Like, what are the type of things we can see for Jake Paul moving forward after? Because it looks like he's going to just avoid an actual boxer for as long as he possibly can, however long this lasts.
100%. And there are a few things at play there. The boxing establishment, the commissions and the purists, what they really want to see is what you just said. They want to see Jake Paul go and fight, a journeyman, a gatekeeper, someone who's, 10-8, or someone who's, even someone who's like 5-11, someone who's been boxing for a while. They're never going to be a championship level boxer, but they're solid boxers, and they could beat they can beat almost every other human being, in their weight class in the world at boxing. And that's what the commissions want from Jake Paul, because it's hard to, the commissions regulate all this stuff, and it's kind of hard to figure out, how the heck to regulate a YouTuber against, an MMA fighter. Like, how does that? It doesn't really compute. When you're trying to like say, is that a mismatch or not? It's so hard. It's so hard to say. But I mean, I spoke to Jake Paul's advisors, Nikisa Badarian from BABFA LLC. He's the key advisor for Jake Paul, former UFC exec, really, really sharp guy. And he said it's just not in the plans for Jake Paul to fight boxing prospects right now, or boxing gatekeepers, because again, even though they may be more skilled than him and certainly more experienced, he's so much more well known, and they're operating on a whole different wavelength of the business. They're not gonna. It doesn't make sense for him to go fight, some guy, in San Bernardino County, California, in front of a few fans. I mean, barring COVID and all that. But for him, it has to be a big event. It has to be someone else across from him that's going to draw interest. It can't just be any old name that no one's ever heard of. Now, maybe down the road, that's what ends up happening. But for now, that's not part of his plan. His plan is to fight mostly MMA fighters who have some kind of interest behind them, some kind of following online, some kind of attitude toward them. So I can see him fighting, with Dylan Dennis, who is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion and an MMA fighter, Conor McGregor's training partner, and then who knows from there? It depends. I mean, the UFC, a lot of these guys are on a contract with the UFC, so it would have to depend on whether or not the UFC will let them fight Jake Paul in a boxing match. The UFC is letting Ben Askren do it. They gave him the okay. Ben Askren retired. He just had hip surgery. He's not going to be going into this fight at his peak, athletic ability. He's also in his late 30s as well. So that's also worth remembering. But it's going to be something like that. It's going to be someone with a name, someone with some intrigue. It's going to be something that's going to warrant a pay-per-view main event. And that's just not going to be like some guy who's 6-12 or whatever.
Yeah, Paul and his team seem to clearly have an idea of what it is they're doing. That's the one thing I took from your piece, Mark, too. They understand the business and wavelength that they're on. I think Paul had a quote where he said the fight is the side product here. Mm-hmm. He clearly understands that. So to put a bow on this before we let you go, the state of boxing, Bryan and I talk about this all the time, where the sport is, how it's growing. Are we seeing necessarily the best fights? I think a lot of us around it would say probably not. Where do you see boxing right now? Where do you see them grow? Even with all this going on with Jake Paul, Mark, where do you see the sport and its health right now in 2021?
It's look, I don't prescribe to the whole boxing is dead theory. There is a lot of talented fighters, and there are a few divisions right now that if things fall the right way, we could be seeing some really, really interesting matchups. There are so many good fighters at lightweight. There's the heavyweight matchup that, hopefully we see Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua. There's the Terrence Crawfords, the Lomachenkos, the, Teo Lopez's. I mean, all those guys, Errol Spence. I mean, there are a lot of big fights in boxing that just need to be put together right now. And that's just kind of the idea. And it's not easy to do. And that's kind of one of the reasons why Lou DiBella, of course, New York boxing promoter, longtime New York boxing promoter, said that maybe boxing kind of left themselves open to this type of Jake Paul thing. Maybe he has kind of exploited a vulnerability in boxing's model because the fights that people want to see are not being put together. And maybe that changes in 2021. I really hope it does. I mean, to me, there are when it comes to combat sports, it's not as I've been saying and as we've been discussing. It's not just about how good you are at boxing or how good you are at MMA. It's about three things to me, 3 S's, right? Stardom, stakes, and story. You need to have all 3 of those things. I just made that up, by the way, off the top of my head.
That was dope, man.
You got to keep that. That was great.
Story. So you need to have some kind of an interest behind you first. That's one key ingredient. Second ingredient is stakes. What are you fighting for? What is the fight for? Because if it is not fighting for, if the winner and loser, there's nothing that matters, then what's the point? No one really cares. There needs to be some stakes and story. And story is the trash talk a little bit. You need to have some element of trash talk, even if it's benign. But tell me a story. Tell me a reason why you're motivated for this fight. Tell me what this fight is all about. And that's what you need to capture the casual interest. Because there's always going to be hardcore MMA fans out there who watch every single UFC, watch every Bellator, PFL, one championship, the whole deal. There's always going to be boxing fans who watch everything, watch the Top Ranks and the Golden Boys and, PBC and the whole deal. They're going to be there. They're not going anywhere. Yep. What boxing and MMA needs, and the UFC does a good job, doing this, they need to bring in the casual fan. And to get the casual fan, you need those 3 things. You need those 3 S's. And if that happens in boxing in 2021 and beyond, everything is going to be golden. But right now, Jake Paul has those 3 S's, and he is almost kind of making an example of boxing and telling, and showing promoters like, look, this is how to do it. And he's doing it very nimbly through social media. That you think Bob Arum knows what TikTok is?
Nope.
you think that Bob Arum knows what like a YouTube story is? Like, probably not. All respect to Mr. Arum, but Jake Paul is 24 years old, and he's been doing this since he was like 10, as far as like creating content. So he has a little bit of an advantage in that promotional aspect, which is, it's hard to penetrate, our psyches. Again, like I said earlier, there's so many things happening, so many freaking things happening. How do you penetrate and make people interested in what you're doing as a combat sports athlete? Jake Paul's doing that. So, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yo, well said, Mark. I encourage everybody to check out your piece on this. I thought it was very well. And like you said, it really kind of looks at the business of boxing and where things are right now. We appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on. We got to have you back when we have to discuss some other fights because you had such great insight here. Thank you, man. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, guys.
One time for your mind, one time. One time for your mind, one time.
One time for your mind this week. Interesting what we're going to do. Usually we bring some news to you, something you haven't heard. Although these are things you haven't heard, these are things of more of a personal nature this week. Brian with some personal news that he will be sharing, and myself with some personal news I'll be sharing. I'm going to let Brian kick it off first because his news is, I don't want to say a little more important, but it's very big. It's huge news for his career. It's something I've known that he's been working on for quite some time. We've kind of teased and talked around it on this podcast, but I'm very happy for what he has to announce. So go ahead and announce, man.
Yeah, and you were, I think, the first person I told about this when I started formulating the idea of playing, of all things, NBA Street Volume 3, you know, early in quarantine. We were just kind of like going back on some stuff, but
only you.
Yeah, it's my debut fiction novel, realistic fiction. Hidalgo Heights, The Victims Are Taking Up Space. It covers a lot of different things. It's a thing that I've been working on for many months. There have been a couple different versions of it that I've since like sort of rewritten or whatever, but all in all, like it's done. Like the manuscript and all that stuff is done, so I felt comfortable announcing it now because all we're doing is just production and stuff like that. I'm working with MEL projects in terms of like the production stuff, and they're helping me with the editorial and things like that. But this is a self-owned thing. Like submitted everything to copyright. You know what I mean? Like this is gonna be 100% like just something I'm doing. And I have big plans for what it can be eventually because I'm looking for this to be a multi-part sort of series. Like I will spoil that part and say that this installment of Hidalgo Heights is not the final version. Like there's going to be a continuation. But in terms of what it covers, it's a lot. Like there are some sports elements, though it isn't a sports story. It's from the perspective of, like I said in the video, and you know we may also have that on this podcast in terms of like an ad, so you can hear me sort of talk about it there. But it was just, you know, a lot of different things are covered. There are a lot of different characters from all different kinds of backgrounds, and granted, it's mostly a Latino American story. You can't tell the story.
Hidalgo Heights. You don't get more Latino than that.
but that's to say, like, there are characters of all different kinds of backgrounds because you can't tell the story of Latinos in America without Black people. You can't tell the story of Latinos in America without white people. So there are, you know, people of different backgrounds or whatever. And it's gonna be something that I think a lot of people will enjoy. I try to, you know, put some funny stuff in there too, so there'll be some stuff that people will laugh into. But it's gonna be good. It's gonna, you know, talk about just identity politics and, you know, stuff that goes on in the Latino community from a whole different array of people and perspectives and things of that nature. But, you know, I'm definitely looking forward to releasing it in the spring. Don't have a date yet, but, you know, add author to the resume now on top of everything else.
Yeah, man. Excited for you. You told me you're working on this, and we'll get into this more once it's released and we really talk about the meat and bones of it on this podcast.
Hopefully, hopefully I'll have a cover. It looks like I might have a cover this in February, so this month.
So I mean,
see.
It's huge. You know, you put work into it. I think this is a testament for people to understand what a lot of creative people with the right mindset did was try to work on things and be as creative as possible during the pandemic. And, you know, you use that time to do something good and positive. So, you know, for people, I have not read it. I know a lot about what it's about and characters and stuff that I talked to Brian about, and Brian asked me questions and perspectives. And I was honored.
I will say it's kind of different from even those conversations too
That we had. Yeah. But Brian did ask me things about different which I'm honored to be able to give some information, characters and perspectives, and it's my experiences and stuff. So yeah, you know, I think it's interesting. I'm very intrigued to read it, man, especially because I don't read a lot of fiction anymore. So I'm very intrigued to read it. It's not that I don't read fiction at all. I just don't read as much as I used to. So, yeah, I'm definitely excited to read it. And that drops, as you said, it'll drop in the spring sometime. So we'll have more announcements on a release date and everything, man. And it's huge.
Yeah.
Um, Also of note, because I put this in the one time for your mind, and we're talking about it here, people should check out Brian's video piece that he did with Deadspin, where he talks about the Latino community and also social activism and everything that surrounds that. I thought it was really good, really well done. I had a chance to look at that before it was released too, a lot of it, and it being released features some great people: Jessica Mendoza, Stephen Espinoza, some really great people. So, I know it's Black History Month, but I think it's a great time to look at the voices of our Latino brothers and sisters that sometimes get suppressed in the mainstream media, and that should not be the case. And I think that's a lot of what Brian talks about. So as a Black person watching it, I just was like, thought it was dope to see those voices from our Latino brothers and sisters. Like it made me proud to see that. And a lot of views we've seen on Twitter already, Brian. So salute, man. I hope that piece does well and touches people in the way that it was supposed to. So
Yeah.
I said it on Twitter. I'm very proud of you for doing that work. It's necessary work,
Yeah.
and we as minorities have to continue to do that in journalism. Have to, man.
And I don't know what the numbers are necessarily, but for me, and I don't know if my editors will want me to say this, but I don't care what the numbers are. I just know it was impactful. I know because I could tell that people felt it. I could tell that it resonated with some people. I don't really care if it was watched by 2,200,000 or just 2,000 because I know it was impactful and I know it was good at the end of the day. And that's how it stands out to me. Like there's some stuff that, in terms of reach and numbers, like that's out of my hands. Like I can post it, tag whomever, do my part. And then from there, it kind of like it does what it does. You know what I mean? So I say that to say like as creatives, we can't just get too caught up in numbers and how things perform just from an analytical standpoint. You have to look at like just one, the quality, because quality should come first in general. But two, just like did it resonate with people? Was it impactful? Like you don't have to know the numbers of something to know it was impactful. Like I
Right.
don't necessarily know like some of the shows I listen to, I don't know how many downloads their podcasts or whatever their show, like I don't know the performance of it from that end. I know it impacts me and a bunch of other people I know that listen to or watch whatever show it is, whether it's Levitar, Joe Budden, et cetera, et cetera. They weren't people who always got numbers, and then after just being impactful for a certain amount of time, it just sort of got to that point. So we're all building at the end of the day, and I'm I said that 2021 was going to be big in terms of like all of these things, and a lot of those roots were laid in 2020 because during the pandemic is more often when or not more often, but during the pandemic is predominantly when I wrote this book. And then, well, we're still in a pandemic, unfortunately. And then this piece that I thought of, like that was in 2020 as well. And I just knew that wherever I got a job at, this was something I wanted to pitch. So it just so happens that Desmond gave me the green light, and we collaborated on it, and I was able to put it together. And I was happy because I wrote it, produced it, hosted it, edited it. Like that was mostly all me. I had some help, but that was something I was able to bring to the table and show that hey, there's a little more here than you may think.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Definitely salute to that and the work you're doing. For me this week on One Time for Your Mind, wanted to talk about for a lot of us. I know we kicked off Black History Month with this episode, but in January, you notice we had a 2 week break where we did not put out any episodes, and we came back last week and didn't get into too much of why. But the real reason why is, look, man, caught that Rona, man. I got COVID. I tested positive earlier in the month. Um, I feel comfortable sharing this because I think it's important for people to know what is going on with this virus and what it can do and how it can impact communities. I'm fortunate. I'm fine. I've now tested negative. I will be, at the time you hear this podcast, I will have returned to work. I took the necessary time to take care of my body, to heal, to rest, to get what is get done. I'm fortunate. I did not have symptoms as bad as some other people I know who have gone through this and have experienced this. But what I would like to say to people, take this seriously. Wear your mask. And it has nothing to do with how you're necessarily living your life, whether it's if you're living it reckless, you're probably going to put yourself in a greater chance. But I'm someone who took precaution. I don't go out much other than for work or to maybe run an occasional errand here. I took precautions. I have no idea how I contracted COVID-19. And you know what? When you contract it, you realize none of that matters. It doesn't matter how you got it or figuring out where. It's just really about, can you bounce back from this? Can you fight this? For me, to share a little bit of my journey, it started off with symptoms that I thought was just a stomach ache. I had a stomach ache and some headaches the week I had it, and then it started progressing and it got worse and worse. And I was like, this isn't really good. I need to get tested. And I got tested, and sure enough, found that it was. And that was only because I did some research and saw there had been some stuff now where people were starting off with symptoms of stomach aches, and then it turned into, I did have a fever, and I did feel extreme fatigue. I mean, days where I barely could get out of bed, fatigue like that, muscle aches, body aches. It was really rough for about 3 days. And this pretty much took me about almost 3 weeks to fully recover. So this is no joke. And, one of the things I will share, and I share this with you, Brian, and talking about it, is the week when I started feeling the symptoms and I didn't know what it was, I was going out and I did do some stories for work. And because I wore my mask and I take precautions, some of the people that I interviewed and did stuff with and we socially distanced appropriately, they were fine. I informed those people, of course, when it was done. Contact tracing, also very important. If you find out that you have this, inform people. Let them know so they can get tested. That also helps to save lives. There's a lot of great people doing great work around this. But what this made me think about, and something that I do want to say on this podcast before we wrap up, is we have seen how this disease, how this virus has affected Black and brown communities in particular, low-income communities in particular. And what I can tell you is I'm someone who's privileged and fortunate enough to have, one, access to good health care, access to good food, access to a job and rest that I didn't have to rush back to, and I was able to take the time to get myself healthy. Some people don't have that, especially in our communities. And by our, I mean the Black, Latino, brown communities, Black and brown communities across, minority communities across the boards, and low income that have to rush back to work, that don't have the good health care. And this virus, I can tell you, it's very tough to beat if you don't have that. You almost are going to have a tough time or another shot. And to mention in our communities, there's sometimes a lot of underlying health conditions where I can totally see how combined with the symptoms of this could take you out. So this is very serious. If you love your loved ones, if you care about anybody, you should be doing this. I felt this way before. This did not take me I did not have to have COVID-19 to realize that I need to care about my fellow brothers and sisters out there. I'm just saying more that people should realize the fact that if you've had it, if you understand how serious it is, please wear a mask. Please do the things that are appropriate. We are now seeing that there are different strains popping up here in this country that aren't necessarily more deadly, but easier to transmit and transfer to other people. So it's even more of this time. We are not out to clear just because vaccines are being doled out. It's more of the time to take it seriously. I'm blessed to be healthy. I'm fine. I'm glad I took the time to recover. But like I said, it took me nearly 3 weeks. I tested positive for it. I then went and got tested again 10 days later, and it still was in my system. So that's another thing. It still might be in your system, and you still want to be careful about what you want to do with that. So that's my last thing I got to say. I'm not trying to preach too much. I'm glad that I'm fine. There are a lot of people out there who are struggling with this. My concern was obviously for my family and other people around me I may have come in contact with, and thankfully they're all fine. So look, wear your damn mask, wear your damn masks, wear your damn mask, and stop being an idiot out there, because some people doing stupid stuff, risking it to go see Bow Wow in Houston and other places like that. That's a whole nother thing. Wear your damn mask. That's all I got to say on that. One time for your mind. That's it. That's it for this episode of A Hard to Tell podcast. We want to remind you, yes, please stay safe, stay healthy out there. Please continue to support us. Check out Brian's piece on Deadspin. Be sure to look on the lookout for his book. We appreciate the support, the following. However you continue to support that is always important for us, especially when we talk about independent media, especially when we talk about independent things created by minorities in media. That is always important, and we absolutely appreciate your support. So, for Brian Fonseca, I'm Dexter Henry. Until next time, y'all. Peace.